Oh, must you two make a spectacle of yourselves?
Welcome to Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara, week 45.
Hello.
We watched episode 218, which originally aired Monday, June 3rd, 1985. I guess it's at the tail end of the sweep, so they've just ended.
Mm-hmm.
But we pick up where we left off on Friday's cliffhanger with Sophia shooting Lionel. And we see the gunfire, and Lionel falls to the ground. Now, in the past, we see Channing falling, as Sophia shot him in 1979, but she thought that she had shot Lionel.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, that's who she sent the note to and who thought it was coming in. So she gets kind of hysterical, thinks she shot Lionel, then at one point she thinks he's joking. She shouts, "Oh, I just wanted to scare you," and meanwhile in 1985, Cruz confirms to everyone present that he just loaded the gun with blanks.
Mm-hmm.
Lionel continues to lie there while Sophia has all her memories rushing back to her, and then suddenly she screams, "I killed my son!" And Marcello apologizes to her, saying that he had promised he would never let her remember that. So it seems to me that he probably did use his hypnosis to help suppress that memory, even though she's, oscillating between thinking she killed Channing and killed Lionel.
And it occurs to me, too, that, perhaps part of the reason she initially just assumed she'd shot Lionel is, remember, she hasn't seen Channing since he was a little wee boy. And so there's probably part of her that still thinks of him that way. She hasn't really seen him as an adult. So it might be natural, especially if he's lying face down and she's in a sort of heightened state, for her to at first perhaps think that she, after all, she sent the note to Lionel, that she had actually shot Lionel.
Mm-hmm. Cruz tells Lionel he can get up, so the gun was, filled with blanks, as we said, and he had actually, apparently, he must have asked Lionel to play along at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Wonder if it was just that few seconds when he came to get him, or if he had talked to Lionel before. Marcello says that's when he replaced Sophia's disguise, and at one point she forgot she'd killed Channing. They ended up hiding in the tunnel for a while, but then ended up in the hallway. And she took the ring and the note off the body as well. When they came out of the tunnel, she rediscovered the body, and once again thought Channing was dead. And Marcello decided to make her think Lionel had killed him, and she did see Marcello's reflection in the mirror, and he made her think it was Lionel. That was just before Joe Perkins came around the corner. So, that leads me to the question, didn't we see Joe and Dominic hear a gunshot, and that's what caused them to run into the study in the original flashback?
Yeah, my feeling was that Joe and Dominic definitely had more interaction than is suggested here.
Mm-hmm. And there was a reason they ran to the study, I thought. So I assumed that at some point Marcello would fire a gun to make it, seem like it had just happened to help build the alibi, but nothing was mentioned at all about that.
Well, I think you have mentioned in previous discussions we've had that they did take a while to settle on the eventual killer of Channing. So maybe when we saw the flashback with Joe and Dominic, they were in another direction.
It wasn't going to be Joe or Dominic.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a good point. So Sophia then tells how shocked she was that the gun went off because she had come in the night before and removed the bullets from the clip.
Mm-hmm.
And then Cece suddenly becomes horrified because he realizes that he had heard what he thought was a prowler in the study and went in, and of course Sophia had hidden in the tunnel by then. But he had checked the desk to make sure no papers had been stolen, and when he found the gun was unloaded, he had loaded it himself. So in my opinion, the real killer of Channing was C.C. Capwell, which is something that you did not learn on the cruise, which I'm very happy about. Because someone did say it at one point in one of the panels, but it was not one of the ones you were at. I think you were sick. So I'm really glad that extra surprise was there for you.
And it's such poetic justice in a way that at the end of the day, it was the combined efforts of Sophia and Cece that killed their beloved son, who no one else liked from.
Yeah. It's a really well constructed, 8 months, 10 months. 10 months, long thing. So.
And it does resolve it in such a way that the whole story can move on now. There's not going to be some residual revenge plot between Cece and Sophia or something like that, or well, we don't know yet if there'll be some sort of trial or legal action, but it's not going to turn into the same kind of vendetta we saw really for the whole previous 10 months with the Perkins family and them pursuing Joe.
Because as we saw, which we'll talk about later, the entire family just rushes around Sophia immediately to protect her, including Marcello, which, Kelly is very annoyed at, but Cruz says no, he should be helping her because he's her psychiatrist.
Yeah.
We'll take a slight detour to the streets of Santa Barbara, where a drunken Brick is being put behind the wheel of a car and shoved towards a cliff. But Brick has enough wits about him to take control of the car, and he actually drives it away, and the thugs are chasing him, but luckily Brick is pulled over by the police. He thanks them because they've saved his life, and they arrest him for drunk driving, and he calls Amy, who happens to be with Minx. They're discussing all things Jeff and Brick and Baby, and Brick asks Amy to come and bail him out, and Minx grabs the phone and says, "If you lose your license, you lose your job." And Brick says, "Could you use a gardener?" And they come to bail him out, and Brick is happy to see them, and he starts talking about what happened, but then he's somewhat annoyed, I think, when Jack Stanfield Lee walks in, because Amy has called him, because it's her boss, and he's a famous attorney. And I suspect Brick thinks that Jack Stanfield Lee might be part of this group, because there was that link with him and Renfro early on. So, they're talking about bail and everything, and Brick's trying to hush Amy up about talking about the rest of the conspiracy. But then Jack Stanfield Lee introduces himself to Minx, and she says, "We met years ago in New York at a party." So this is another error made by fake Jack Stanfield Lee.
Well, I can sort of see why they did this, because I think they really need Jack Stanfield Lee at this point to still be a very active participant. If you think about it, if they hadn't brought him in with this, where would he have been in the story? They would have been pursuing Renfro and the baby and whatever. But this brings him back into the center of it, and now we can explore a little more the whole thing with him or the real Jack Stanfield Lee and Julia, and maybe see if Julia trips him up somehow.
We still haven't seen a scene with Julia and Minx, I don't think.
No, I don't think we have. In fact, we haven't seen Julia for a little while.
No, I think everyone's taking this week off. We haven't seen... I think we've briefly seen Maggie, but we haven't seen anything with her case at all.
No.
For a while, and I think I assume it'll resume. They didn't take that offer, did they? Maybe they did take that offer.
No,
remember? She said... Yeah, that's right, she rejected it.
And when this whole thing's, with the whole murder was being played out, and Mason kind of reconciled a little bit with Cece during this. And Warren says, "Oh dear, this isn't going to be good for Maggie's case."
That's right, because when Cece realized he'd killed Channing, Mason went over and hugged him, and Cece let him hug him.
Yeah.
So Cruz gives a bit of a summation as to everything that's happened. He says that Marcello's the one who typed Peter's note. He's the one who stole the gun, and he's the one who blew up the tunnel, which gets everyone angry all over again.
Yeah.
And someone says he's also an accomplice. I don't know who said that. And Mason says, but to whom and to what? What crime has been committed? So I think there's discussion about that this is all an accident, yet they still want Marcello to pay for being an accomplice. But so the family basically decides that Cruz should just forget about everything. And Augusta says, well, I'm not going to forget it. I'll go to the DA myself if Cruz doesn't. So, and, someone points out that Cruz would lose his job if he covered up a crime. And then Mason says, several of us in this room there are several of us in this room who could tell, for reasons good or bad. So Augusta, obviously, and I think both he and Lindsay, as officers of the court, are required to report such things. So I don't think the Capwells have really endeared themselves to Lindsay. He has no reason to help them cover this up.
And they certainly haven't endeared themselves to Augusta over the years, or any of the Lockridges for that matter. So they can certainly bring the complaint themselves. And, there is no chance of Marcello walking away. I mean, he's already being caught trying to kill CC and Sophia and Kelly. And, of course, he caused the tunnel collapse.
Which killed Hank Judson.
Yeah. So he's going away no matter what. But it's just a matter of what really happens to Sophia. And, perhaps in some jurisdictions, CC as well, if he's improperly stored a firearm or something like that. So.
I'm wondering if this is actually a very clever thing of Cruz. To have Augusta and Lionel and Warren and Lindsay there, and Santana,
who's not feeling a lot of love for them either.
If it was just him and the Capwells, they could really pressure him to hide this. I think by having all these other witnesses there, many of whom hate the Capwells, have nothing to gain by lying for the Capwells, he's kind of secured himself that safety that, they can't get mad at him for, reporting to the DA what he's found. And he does say it's up to the DA to press charges. And he's a friend of CC's, so, it's not really Cruz who can be blamed for this at this point.
Although it does seem to me, if that was his logic, that he might have been even more clever to have had a few police officers there as well. Like Maggie Gillis.
Maybe he thought having an officer of the court with Lindsay was good enough. And that is it. It's a quick summary because it was basically one long scene in the study for most of the cast. And Brick was in a car, and then he was in jail. So it's basically just been the murder and the Amy story as the two main stories of the week. But now it's Monday, and we've wrapped up the murders. So come Tuesday, maybe we'll start to see Maggie and Julia and
and we
Frank.
haven't seen the photographer, who's Nick.
All right. Anything else about the murder that you'd like to talk about? Like, what are your thoughts overall on the 10 months that you've invested in this whodunit?
Well, as we often joke, I would still like to know who coshed Joe when he had Dominic covered with a gun way back in whatever it was, August or September. That's one little inconsistency that I don't think we're going to get solved.
And the one I brought up today, whereas I'm sure there was a gunshot that brought Marcello and Joe running. Dominic and Joe running to the study. So.
Yeah, but I thought it was actually quite a nice, tidy little way of doing it, especially since we've seen CC having built up Channing to this great extent, and we've now had evidence that Channing was trying to live out this for CC. And then, of course, at the very, very end, to learn that it was CC who was in many ways ultimately responsible for his death, I think was a really neat way to kind of tie up the whole story.
Mm-hmm. And, a bunch of things did come out as a result of the investigation, and Cece still doesn't know about the Channing-Lindsay connection.
No, and we still don't know what Mason and his mother had planned. So they've planted a whole bunch of little seeds here that we can pick up for future storylines.
And there are actually 2 or 3 other things that haven't come out yet. So I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, that'll be fun.
All right, maybe one of those will come out in the next episode 219 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Well, I'm just dying to meet the senior partner.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've finished episode 219 of Santa Barbara, which aired Tuesday, June 4th, 1985. Cruz calls Maggie to come and arrest Marcello. Marcello says his goodbyes to the family. It's like at the end of Wizard of Oz, when she has something to say to everyone. He's got something to say to each of them, and he tells the family members that they all need each other now.
And the interesting thing I found about this, and I think we've maybe commented on this dynamic throughout the Marcello story, is that despite everything Marcello has done, CC actually seems to have a more positive attitude towards Marcello than he has to other members of his family, because he's actually very mild about the whole thing and kind of wishes Marcello
He had worse things to say about Mason in this episode than Marcello.
Yeah.
Gina says to Lionel, shouldn't someone be coming to arraign Sophia at some point?
Yeah, you'd think so.
He's anxious to get Sophia in jail. Mason asks Cruz what he's going to do now that everyone knows Sophia shot Channing. He says he needs to think about it overnight. And people badger him throughout the episode to make a decision now, to not prosecute her, most of them. But he sticks with his, I need to think about it overnight. He puts Sophia under house arrest for the night. Mason offers Sophia his services as a lawyer, but Cece turns him down, which is a bit of a shocker, and he says it's because he's the one that poisoned Channing's mind.
I don't even know what that means, really, at this point.
Well, Mason says it's Cece's bad fathering that's the reason Channing was such a terrible person. Gina expresses her surprise that Cece and Mason didn't get closer once it was revealed that Mason wasn't the killer.
Yeah.
Mason warns her that Cece and Sophia are getting closer. And Gina suddenly realizes that the baby might be Hank's, which is surprising since we've thought of that since the beginning.
Yes. Hank being the younger, assuming he's more virile man than Cece. Really.
The odds are possibly in Hank's favor. Cece threatens to ruin Lindsay if he doesn't tell him why he and Peter were blackmailing Channing. Lindsay doesn't say a thing.
Well, Lindsay's kind of in a lose-lose situation here, because if he tells Cece the whole truth, Cece's going to try and destroy him anyway, so he may as well keep his mouth shut and keep him guessing.
Or even if it just comes out, I think it's bad for Lindsay's job. Cece says he'll regret it, so we've now got someone else that Cece might be planning revenge against. Gina takes the opportunity as Santana leaves to tell her never to come back to the house. And faux Jack Stanfield Lee arrives. Cece wants him to change his will so that Brandon will inherit the company when he turns 21. Or become chairman of the company, something like that. So I guess it's not a publicly traded company. It sounds like it's just all family owned.
Yeah.
And then he also tells Jack he wants him to take on Sophia's defense, if it comes to that.
Now, we don't know if faux Jack Stanfield Lee actually has any legal skills at all. So
he didn't seem too worried.
No.
He didn't blow him off like the other cases that people have been trying to get him to take. Maybe he is a lawyer, and maybe he's got time for them now that the Amy thing is over.
Or maybe having fulfilled his obligations, Ari, Amy, and the baby, he knows he might be blowing out of town soon or something like that. That's another possibility.
We did have theories that he might start working for CC, so this suddenly it's like two things in one.
Yeah.
And he may well have him take on the Maggie case too at some point. Lionel is disgusted with Augusta for trying to get Sophia railroaded as quickly as possible.
I don't know if that was entirely fair because, remember, Augusta did lose her eyesight in this whole cave-in, which of course was Marcello, but this is all actually a Capwell saga that, she got...
That has negatively impacted the Lockridges for 6 years.
Yeah, and Sophia did kill Channing, so I don't know if it's necessarily railroading her to expect her to be arrested for that.
When Maggie shows up to get Marcello, Warren refuses to tell her what happened in the study because Cruz asked them all to keep it a secret overnight. At the Lockridge house, Jack Stanfield Lee pops over and offers Julia a job. And Augusta jokes that Julia might develop a crush on him if they work together. Warren tells Julia about his lawsuit with Mason and Maggie. And she says that Mason's untrustworthy, but a good choice, as he does hate his father. So, Warren said that he's a bit worried that might have changed after the events of tonight, but he's not allowed to speak about. Then later she goes to the State Street bar to meet Jack to confirm that the job offer is real. And she declines a drink with Jack, but spots Mason Capwell's little table. And I guess, having discussed Mason Capwell with Warren, she's a bit curious about him, and so she sits at his table to wait for him to arrive. Well, Mason does arrive, but she doesn't know who he is. So he comes over there, and he assumes that because she's sitting at his table that she is one of Ginger's girls. And he makes some comments as to her profession and asks her if she gets more than $100. She replies that she routinely does get more than $100, and they have a hilarious and awkward initial conversation before she finally realizes that the man she's talking to is Mason Capwell.
It's really fun to see them come together, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where that relationship goes. It's fun to see Mason with Gina, and I think Julia will be his equal in many ways as well. So I think that's a really neat development, and hopefully is a good sign for Maggie's case. Yeah,
I mean, I doubt it will be for over Maggie's case, but maybe we'll see Mason and Julia on opposite sides of cases in the future. At the houseboat, Eden wants to talk about Sophia, but Cruz says they should be thinking about their wedding tomorrow, which, of course, we're looking forward to. We'll get out our champagne again. D.A. Tony Patterson, who we haven't seen in quite a while, shows up at the houseboat in the middle of the night, and he's really anxious to start arresting someone for the murder of Channing. But Cruz tells him he's got to wait till morning, and he says, "Well, what's going to be there in the morning that you don't have now?" And he says the truth. So the DA kind of buys that, but I guess he's really itching to press charges.
Yeah.
So this actually put some additional pressure on Cruz because, he's been just trying to decide what to turn over to the DA, and now he knows if he does, the DA will push for something. So I think the only thing Cruz can hope is that the DA maybe owes something to CC regarding maybe his last election, and that the DA might be willing to look the other way over Sophia. Gina follows CC as he walks Sophia to the guest house, having, after Mason told her that Sophia and CC were getting close, and she sees them hug and kiss. So she's very angry. She takes some pills and calls the Santa Barbara Sentinel to tell them that Channing Capwell Jr.'s killer has confessed, and that she heard it, and so did Inspector Cruz Castillo. And before she can continue, it turns out that Cece is at the doorway, has heard the whole thing, and he shouts at her quite loudly, and she drops the phone and her pills, which Cece picks up and immediately recognizes as the pills that Brandon took a few weeks ago, and says, "You're still taking them, aren't you?" So I think this is not going to go well for Gina at all. This double whammy of trying to send Sophia to jail and that she's been lying about taking these pills all these weeks.
Yeah, I think this might be the beginning of the end of her marriage to CC, potentially, because we know, as Mason has pointed out to her repeatedly, that, you know, since they've basically gone through the legalities with Brandon, CC doesn't really need Gina anymore. And he's started to well down his path to reconciliation with Sophia, I would say, at least, you know, reconciling himself to her affair with Lionel and, you know, the various things that happened between them. So, you know, this is not good timing for Gina to have her drug habit discovered, and, of course, for him to discover her ratting him out to the Sentinel.
Unless Gina can talk her way out of it, which we've seen she sometimes can do, I think she's going to really need to leverage this baby to either stay in CC's life or get a bunch of money from him.
Yeah.
Those are, I think, the two things she can do. And then Brandon as well, maybe.
And with the pregnancy, she's got to hope that, I'm assuming blood tests were a thing at this time, she's got to hope that, you know, CC doesn't question that the baby's his.
Mm-hmm. And we'll see if it even is Hank's or his.
Yeah.
Anything else about today you wanted to discuss?
Not really. I actually was almost missing a little bit of the Amy storyline because I'm just so interested to see where that's going to lead. But I think you mentioned that's probably going to be quite a long-running storyline. So we'll get bits and pieces of that going forward.
And now that the whodunit is wrapped up, I mean, there's a little bit as to, you know, what Cruz will be doing with Sophia, but that obviously it's just going to be one of several storylines. It's not going to take up whole episodes like these last 2 days or 3 days that we've had.
Now, I assume Eden and Cruz are going to get married at some point. They don't seem particularly happy with each other right now. So whether this wedding tomorrow actually takes place or not, we'll have to see.
All right, and Marcello. Thoughts on Marcello?
Well, it seemed like a goodbye episode with him, so I'm not necessarily expecting to see him again because his story did seem to be nicely wrapped up, but I suppose if Sophia is arraigned somehow, if Cruz decides to go that route, then we might see him again testifying or something like that.
And I don't know if we've ever seen what happened to his explosives. Like, are they still out there somewhere?
That's right, yeah. That's a really good point. He seemed to be scoping out the yacht for that. So that's still a wild card. That's still a possibility.
Well, we'll see if we ever see those explosives again, if we ever see Marcello again. We'll be back after we watch the Wednesday episode, number 220 of Santa Barbara. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Capwell's Psycho Gazebo. Capwell's Psycho Gazebo.
Kelly Capwell's gonna die.
Goodbye, Kelly. Goodbye. I love you.
Kelly Perkins won't be long now.
I'm sorry. I promise you, Hans, no matter what happens, I'll come back after the war and I'll find you. I want to make it up to you for your parents' death.
You won't come back. I know you won't.
I will. I give you my word. I would take you with me now, but the military won't allow it.
I'm afraid. Let my parents die. Now you're going to let me die.
No. I won't. I promise you. You'll be seeing me again very soon. I won't let you down. I'll be back.
Mother? Father? I failed you. It was suddenly so difficult to be alone. I wanted to replace you. I was weak. I swear to you, on the graves wherein your murderer placed you, that I will not fail you again. May 20th. May 20th marks the 41st anniversary of the year that C.C. Capwell stole your lives from you. It will also be the day that he pays you back. It will be here, on this yacht, that C.C. Capwell comes to his final resting place. Here, on May 20th, the day that he killed my parents. Yes, this will be a fine place to honor the anniversary of my parents' death. On May 20th. I will not feel it. I will not hear it again. I will not go mad. That day is gone. That boy is gone. The blood is gone. Millions have been born, and millions have died, and the earth has turned 10,000 times through 10,000 nights. The light of that day has reached the farthest stars. The sounds, the voices, have all become particles and scattered into space. I am here. I am myself. I have always been, and I will always be alone. He cannot hurt me now.
My name is Hans Ryker, and mine is the last voice that you will ever hear. You cannot leave, you cannot stop Lieutenant Capwell.
Hey, what is that? Where's it coming from?
Oh, no, honey.
Ryker, what is it?
Yes, that was Marcello's name.
You are trapped in this small, unlikely place where your life will end. You will die.
Marcello, isn't it?
Yes.
What is he saying?
It will not be so painful nor so slow as the death my parents met on this day 41 years ago.
Daddy.
Must be some way.
Did you think of it this morning when you woke? The death you made me party and witness to? But to see a death is to belong to it. To carry it with you like a diagnosis, like a secret name. I am seeing yours now.
He's planning to kill you, that's what he's saying.
He wants his revenge.
But I don't understand. Dan, he forgave you for all of that.
None of this makes any sense, honey, except in his sick mind. You gotta stop this thing and get out of here. Damn it, none of them work. I gotta punch a bunch and see if I can turn this thing off.
Kelly Capwell's Psycho Gazebo welcomes Hans Ryker. Welcome back.
Hello.
We've watched episode 220 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Wednesday, June 5th, 1985. In the middle of the night, Cruz is contemplating his next move. He runs into Nick at 2 a.m. at the State Street Bistro. Then he runs into Warren Lockridge, who's contemplating the fact that he almost killed Channing. Then Maggie shows up, and she and Warren end up going to her place, and he ends up sleeping it off on her couch.
I think we can now see why the State Street Bistro is so popular. They seem to be a 24-hour establishment.
If you'll remember La Mesa, they seem to close early. Maybe it's easier to not get murdered if you're open 24 hours a day. And Maggie does say to him, say to Warren that she cares for him and she doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
So I think that will inch forward again now that the murder storyline is not taking up 100% of the airtime. Ted and Kelly look through a box of stuff from the fire. Seems to be quite a small box. I don't know who turned it into them and why it's at the Capwell house. But one of the items in it is Nick's camera. And she takes the opportunity to return it to him. She calls and says she's coming over, and he scrambles to clean his place up.
It actually reminded me a bit of your place when I first met you.
I see. Did I have any photos of my dead friends from Vietnam that I talked about on our first date?
No, but you did have a lot of clothes in the living room.
That's where I kept them. So anyway, Kelly doesn't seem to be too put off by the story of Nick's dead friend. There was a cool instrumental version of Bad Moon Rising playing in the background of this story.
Yes, because that was actually a really big part of this story, is when Nick is remembering his friend. He remembers him always playing Bad Moon Rising. And I suspect either they couldn't get the rights to the song at, maybe a reasonable price, or maybe they just decided to put a more modern spin on it. But we do hear a sort of synthesized version of it in the background throughout this entire scene.
Kelly, of course, spots that he's just rapidly cleaned up because she finds the odd sock here and there. And then she looks at his photos and says they're really good. And then he talks about the fact that he probably won't develop the ones he took on the night of the fire because he's afraid of fire. It's more Vietnam stuff, I guess, from him.
Yeah.
This is 1985. The Vietnam War ended in 75, and Nick's considerably older than Kelly, I think. Probably even older than Peter Flint was, I would think. He kind of looks like he's at least 30, so.
Yeah.
Cece confronts Gina about the pills. Of course, he immediately realizes she's been taking them all along because he had ordered Rosa to throw them all out.
Yeah.
She claims she's not addicted. She just takes them once in a while when she needs one. So he locks the door and says, well, we'll see. And of course, we don't know how many hours go by, but eventually she cracks and she says, just give me my pills. So he gets her to freak out in a really great way that Linda Gibney can freak out as Gina.
Yeah.
And she claims that he turned her into a drug addict. It's possible, I suppose. It happened very quickly. It was like a 2-day thing. She says, you like to make people suffer. Just look what you did to Joe Perkins, to Mason. You're a monster to your children. Look what you did to Marcello. So brings all that stuff up, and he starts, saying, when you were a secretary, you would just uncross your legs a lot so you could hook a man like Stockman. So he has no excuse because he's not on drugs.
Yeah.
Ted arrives, and Cece realizes that Ted knew about the pills, and Gina actually tries to cover for him a bit, but, it comes out. She says, well, I hid the fact that I found the pills from him, and I told him that I wasn't taking them anymore. So Cece decides that Gina needs to go into an institution.
Mm-hmm.
So I think she's kind of happy that Ted's there, but he's not really doing anything to stop that. But I think she feels it would be worse if he wasn't there. But Cece calls the doctor, and Gina decides, I guess, to air everything in front of the doctor.
Yeah.
Say, I don't want to be put away. I can stay here and dry out. And she says he's worse than Hank Judson. And then Cece sends the doctor out of the room, and he's actually angry with Gina for saying all those things in front of the doctor. So I think that's, Gina did want to embarrass him because, she knows he could have her locked away and take Brandon. She could be locked up for life,
Yeah.
Like Lionel Lockridge's aunt or grandma or whatever it was.
It was. I thought it was kind of nice in a way, though, that she does try to protect Tad, and she does talk sympathetically about Mason, who's kind of her frenemy at this point. So, it is nice that in spite of all this, and of course, she's being portrayed as being quite selfish in a lot of ways, but she does still have a little place in her heart for them, which frankly Cece doesn't seem to have at this point. I also thought it was really interesting that she brings Hank Judson into the story and basically says, he was my pusher, which brings a slightly different angle, I would think, at least from Cece's perspective, into her relationship with Hank.
Yes, she brings out a lot in that. Could bring out a lot in that one or two conversations. Sophia and Eden can't sleep. Sophia tells Eden she shouldn't worry about her. She should be concentrating on her wedding later today. Mm-hmm. I have to get that champagne bottle out, I think, pretty soon for this wedding.
Why not?
She asks Eden to go to Channing's grave with her. She gets a sudden urge, and she brings flowers, puts them on the grave, and starts. The sun seems to come up around that time, because I think it's a bit, this was all at 2 a.m., but I think it's actually early morning now. And Sophia asks Channing to forgive her, and then Cruz arrests her at Channing's grave. And Eden slaps him. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how that's going to affect the wedding.
Yeah, I would think it would at least be postponed.
Maybe. He says he's going to recommend the most minimal charges, so we'll see. Reckless handling of a firearm or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know how minimal that is, if it causes death. So that's pretty much all that happened. Pretty compact.
Yeah, really, it's the story. I was thinking about this. It's in this episode, we see a tale of 4 romances, and 4 of them, or 2 of them, are just starting, perhaps, with Kelly and Nick, and Warren and Maggie, and 2 of them are a bit on the rocks at this point, with Cece and Gina, and of course, Cruz and Eden.
And Gina did take the opportunity to slip in some comments about how he's moved Sophia in. So, Speaking of Sophia, right after we saw this episode, we watched Barnaby Jones, and Rosemary Forsyth was the guest villain. Spoiler alert! In the episode, and of course, Rosemary Forsyth played Dominic when Santa Barbara first started, and never got a chance to play Sophia, I guess.
No, we never
Marcy
got
Walker
to see her
was
without
playing
the
her in the
baby.
flashbacks when Rosemary Forsyth was just Dominic. So, so that's another Santa Barbara thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Nicholas Coster posted something on Facebook today with him and Richard Eden, who's Brick Wallace, and their wives having a fun but masked dinner together on his boat. So that was kind of fun to see what Richard Eden looks like 35 years later.
I thought he had aged very well, actually. And it's still recognizable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once he took the mask off.
Yeah, it was a little harder with the mask.
And that's it for a Wednesday episode. So we'll see what the DA wants to charge Sophia with tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
When we watch episode 221 of Santa Barbara. See you then.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 221 of Santa Barbara, originally aired Thursday, June 6th, 1985.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Wiley. Do we know Mrs. Wiley? Does she work at the Capwell estate? Is she a cook or a maid? Or does she somehow work for the Institute where they plan to bring Gina? But either way, Mrs. Wiley comes in to help Gina pack.
Yeah, I kind of felt like she was maybe with the Institute or an affiliate of the doctor or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But she was wearing a weird outfit. So. Gina phones Mason for help, and he comes over right away.
Mm-hmm.
And he takes the opportunity to ask who might the father of her baby be, and she says that Hank forced himself on her, so it could be his. And she tells him she won't agree to go until Sophia is in jail. So she's clearly worried that without her there, Sophia and Cece will get closer.
I think she's just upset with the injustice of it all, too. If Sophia, having murdered Channing, is still free to roam around the Capwell Manor while she's being locked up in an institution.
Mm-hmm. Santana comes over and observes all that's going on. She seems to be a little bit shocked, I think, by the fact that Gina's being institutionalized. I think maybe this just relates to, what she knows about how Cece can be when he wants to get his way. So.
Yeah, I think this is... I think this whole episode is sending signals to a lot of people, not only about Gina and her activity, but it's showing them a certain side of Cece as well, which they probably knew was there, but maybe not to this extent.
Mm-hmm. Cece has some papers brought over, and he says that they are so that he can gain control over Brandon's trust fund.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mason is there at the time, and he gleefully tells Cece that he already has control of Brandon's trust fund, which really upsets Cece.
Yeah.
Then Cece says things like, "Oh, you're the one who got her hooked on these pills, so she'd sign over the control of the trust fund," and crazy stuff like that. So. Rick is trying to convince Amy that Dr. Renfro kidnapped her baby.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, we see faux Jack Stanfield Lee making arrangements with Parker Simonson to call Amy at a predetermined time. Sophia is meanwhile being fingerprinted, and DA Tony Patterson tells Cruz that he wants to charge her with murder one. And he wants to charge CC as an accessory too. Now, Cruz is totally against this and says, that it's clearly an accident. And the DA brings up things like, "Oh, well, why was she in disguise? I'm going to use that as premeditation." So, Eden overhears quite a bit of that and says to him, "Thank God I didn't marry you, and I never will." Faux Jack Stanfield Lee arrives as Cruz is asking Sophia why she was wearing a disguise. Now, he's trying to help her get her story clear for when the DA questions her, but Jack Stanfield Lee advises Sophia not to answer any more questions because, from his point of view, it looks like Cruz is trying to trick her.
Yeah.
So later he brings Sophia back to the Capwell mansion. So I don't know if she's on bail exactly or what, but she's definitely not locked up right now. And we warn CC that the DA is going for murder one. And then he calls Parker to say he's just leaving the Capwell house to call Amy in 10 minutes. So he goes to visit Amy and just to see how she's doing, and then the phone call comes in from Parker Simonson, and he threatens Amy. He says, "Stop looking into your son. if you want him to be safe. And so basically confirming to her that her son's been kidnapped, but also warning her not to look into it. So she tells Jack the whole story, and he pretends to be shocked and, makes a call to have someone look into Dr. Renfro and track him down. And Amy also tells him Nurse Bailey's name. So I don't think that's going to end well for Nurse Bailey.
No, I definitely don't think it will. However, I do think perhaps looking down the road, if something does happen to Nurse Bailey, this might be one of the things that Brick can use to show Amy that Jack Stanfield Lee is not to be trusted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brick shows up just as Jack is just leaving, and he's very upset that Amy told Jack all about it. And he tells Jack he thinks he's in on it with Renfro, and he says, we've been on a board together for 10 years, but, I'm shocked that he would do something like this. And anyway, he seems to talk Brick out of thinking that he's involved. And Brick ends up shaking hands with him and thanking him, but it's not necessarily clear if Brick has bought into it or if he's just covering.
Yeah, I think it could be a little bit of both. Maybe he's hoping that Jack Stanfield Lee, especially since Amy's given him all this information, that he is actually legitimate, because then he could actually be of some help, perhaps. But I think he's very suspicious too. And given his recent experience with the thugs trying to kill him, maybe it's not a bad idea for him to cover up a little bit with these people he doesn't quite trust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mason tells Gina there's nothing they can do.
Mm-hmm.
That Cece has the right to have her committed. And she says goodbye to Brandon and tells her to stay away from Santana because she's trying to hurt us. And then later when Santana offers to help them make a picnic lunch for Gina, he says no! So Santana's kind of taken aback at Brandon's sudden rejection of her. When Gina comes down, ready to be taken away, and making quite a big scene of it, she's shocked to find Sophia there and not in jail. And she says some negative things about Sophia, and how Cece just moved her in there behind her back, and all kinds of things. And then she tells Cece to keep Santana away from Brandon. So, I don't know, after all those negative things she said to Cece, she then asked him a favor. So, Mason says to Cece that maybe this was his plan all along, to get control of Brandon, have him shipped over to your friend Stockman, and marry his widow, and then adopt him. And he says Sophia probably helped Cece. And he says she didn't. He said, well, at least she probably helped you make up your mind. Mm-hmm. The way you did when you got rid of my mother. Mm-hmm. Of all his many weaknesses, he says to Sophia, I think you may be the greatest.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a change in Mason's attitude towards Sophia, because they've been getting along pretty well, but in this one you can see Mason's not quite as nice about Sophia in this, and she doesn't seem to be quite as nice to him in this either, so it was really interesting, the look on Cece's face when Mason said that, because I think at some level Cece knows that he's saying something true. Mm-hmm,
mm-hmm. It didn't actually occur to me the parallel between, Pamela being ushered out and Sophia being ushered in and Gina until Mason said it. But, oh yeah, that is an interesting pattern on Cece's end. Cruz tries to talk to Eden during the day, but she refuses to see him. Tony Patterson visits him at the houseboat to talk strategy, and he resigns from the police force. And Eden had told him earlier that he should have resigned before arresting Sophia. So Eden comes.
I don't think that would have necessarily solved their problems, though, because we already know that Augusta's ready to report on who the killer is, and Mason and Lindsay, as we've discussed, would probably be legally obligated to say something.
Cruz would still have had to testify to everything.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's just that he's the one who arrested Sophia, I mean, wouldn't she rather be someone in the family? Eden comes back to the houseboat to get her things and tells Cruz she never wants to see him again. So, that is that. That champagne will not get drunk, ever, I guess.
You know, I'm hoping with the writing that they do a few more, I don't know, kind of different things with the writing. I'm getting a little tired of all these scenes. I think just about every scene Eden's been in where she's been given the last word.
Mm.
And I would like to see someone else self-righteously get the last word.
We'll keep our eye out for that.
Yeah, I'd like that.
See if that happens. That is the end of episode 221. So we've got one episode left in week 45, episode 222. So we'll see you after we watch that.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We finished episode 222 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired Friday, June 7th, 1985. So, still not the end of the school year. So we still don't know what's going on with Lakin and Jade and Ted and Danny and Miss Parks.
And we don't know what kind of summer adventures are in store for the kids either.
No, well, I do.
You do.
I remember.
I'm sure there's something, though, that's going to happen over summer holidays.
There surely is. And I think we're going to have another NBC guest star this summer, too.
Oh, how exciting.
The biggest star on NBC after David Hasselhoff. So maybe you can think about that for the next few weeks before that person shows up.
Well, my goodness, 1985. I would think Bill Cosby was pretty big on NBC.
Mm-hmm. True.
What else was big? They had their whole Thursday night lineup, didn't they? They had Cheers, so Ted Danson, and I don't know, what else was on their Thursday night lineup?
Night Court.
Night Court.
LA Law. Family Ties was still on, I think.
Yeah, Family Ties.
Last time we saw an episode of Vegas a few days ago, we saw Ian Abercrombie, Philip, from Santa Barbara.
It was a little treat.
Yeah, it was, because Vegas is surprisingly boring. Although as a child I found it boring. But I kept watching it thinking, it's called Vegas. It's got to have something exciting. But it never did. So now, rewatching it, I agree with my, 12-year-old self. And we also saw Robin Wright today at DC Fandom. I don't know why she is in the Wonder Woman 84 panel, because wasn't her character killed off in the original Wonder Woman?
I seem to recall it was, but maybe things will change with the next movie. Who knows?
Or maybe a lot of those Amazons are made from the same clay mold, and she'll be playing another Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
We will see. Anyway, it was exciting to see her, and quite a long panel where she was playing a game with the rest of the cast, which I didn't quite understand, but it went on for a very long time. So
I got tired of it and did something else.
On episode 222, Eden came by to pick up her records, and Cruz said, well, you knew I was going to be here. You came by on purpose. Anyway, they end up fighting over the records and their relationship. He tries to kiss her at one point, and she ends up just leaving the records and leaving. So she's obviously not ready to make up the next morning already, and he gets a call from the chief of police saying, I've got your badge and gun here, and it doesn't take too much for him to actually talk Cruz into taking them back. So Cruz is back on the force as of later today, I think.
Yeah, it kind of made me wonder, if things had maybe gone a little differently with Eden, if their discussions had maybe gone in a more positive direction, if perhaps he would have stuck by his idea to quit. But
that's what I'm thinking. I tend to think that the various conversations with Eden were the triggers for the resignation and the revocation of the resignation.
Yeah, I mean, if he doesn't have Eden, so he doesn't have that relationship in his life, I mean, he may as well go back to doing his job.
Mm-hmm. Brandon cuts his finger, cutting flowers from the garden for Gina with Rosa. Cece and Sophia are there too, because the flowers are around the guest house. Cece calls him Little Soldier as he's being bandaged up, and Sophia says he used to call Ted that. And then she said that he should include all of his children in his new dynasty that he's been talking about, including Mason. So that's nice of Sophia, even though Mason kind of abandoned her recently. She's not giving up on him, so that's nice.
Mm-hmm, that is nice.
Cece tells Eden that the reconstruction of the hotel is coming along fine, and he's so pleased with it that he's decided to make her vice president of all hotel and resort operations. So I think this is the first time we've heard the word resort in association with the Capwell holdings. Cece's lawyer arrives and tells Cece that Maggie will probably win if it goes to trial. And like some other people in the public eye we might think of, Cece fires him because that's not what he wants to hear. And he tells Eden Jack Lee is taking over. So he actually puts her in charge of interfacing with Jack Lee on this.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't be a day in Santa Barbara without half the town being in the State Street Bistro. Maggie and Warren are at the bar, and Mason shows up there briefly. Julia shows up there briefly. Maggie mentions to Warren that Red Adair is the one who put out the fire that her husband was injured in 3 years earlier, and Warren wonders if maybe Cruz was there that day, because of course he was working with Red Adair. They talk to Cruz, and he says he wasn't, but a friend of his was at that fire. Cruz remembers that his friend was talking about someone whose hand was badly injured. So they're thinking maybe this person can give some testimony, and Mason suggests, getting an employee list. And he knows a guy at Capwell, Max Lichter, who, for the right amount of money, will probably be able to get them almost anything they want. Santana invites Cruz to the park with her and Brandon. And Eden arrives at State Street Bistro just as they're chatting and says to Cruz that he's not wasting any time, assuming that he's pursuing Santana now.
Now, we should say that Cruz also did have a conversation with Warren and Maggie as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, in the corner this whole time is Julia. She's observing everything. When Eden arrives, she sees him, and she goes to Jack's table. So then Julia says to her, to herself, incredible, he hits on every woman in town. So now she's thinking Jack is hitting on Eden. Which he is not quite yet. But seconds later, Eden asks Jack if he'll take the case, and Jack says, I'll take the case provided I'll be working with you.
So we're seeing all these kind of moving pieces going on basically at the same time in the State Street Bistro. With different characters kind of grouping and ungrouping.
So maybe the weird new restaurant layout is conducive to getting that many different conversations going without a lot of cameras having to whirl across the stage. I'm thinking Eden and Jack is a possible pairing. If she's not interested in Cruz, I can't imagine Jack turning down anyone. So I'm actually thinking this might happen. I have actually absolutely no memory of this whole year, basically. So this could be interesting. Eden ends up offering him a ride to his office, because of course his office is in the ground floor of the Capwell Hotel where she's going, and she's going to start her new position there. Julia comes over before they leave and gets Jack to introduce her to Eden. So I think she just wants to know where all the pieces are, and she actually overhears that they're working together on the Gillis case. So she finds that interesting information. Then we have Julia and Mason's second scene, which is just as entertaining as their first was. Julia gets into Mason's car unexpectedly, and he says, "What's this?" She says, "Don't worry, I'm not soliciting." And he says, "That was an honest mistake." So Julia tells him that Warren hired her to be on the case too, and Jack warns her that Jack has taken the case for the Capwell side. Mason's wondering, what the relationship there is. She says we go way back, and she has a score to settle with him. So I think Mason sees a kindred spirit there, and he has a score to settle with Cece, and she's got a score to settle with Jack. So Mason tells Warren that she'll be a good addition to the case.
And what I found interesting about this scene between Mason and Julia is Mason guessed fairly quickly who Julia was, that she was Augusta's sister. And didn't really bat an eye at that either, which is really interesting to me because, no one's really seen her for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
Augusta literally hasn't seen her yet, so it's just interesting that Mason just kind of took that in stride.
I mean, he's got all his research, that we know that he's got research on everyone. I'm sure he has research on the Lockridges, so, he must be aware that Augusta's got a sister Julia, who's an attorney.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just another piece that slotted into place for him.
Well, we know that Julia knows about Mason. She knows he's a good lawyer. So it does seem like perhaps being in the same profession, they would know of each other professionally, even if they haven't met.
Mm-hmm. Even being in different states.
Mm-hmm.
Eden is moving into her new office at Capwell, which has been recently vacated by the fired Max Lichter. Uh-oh, that's the guy that Mason told Warren and Maggie to call. And the call comes in, and Eden gets Betty, her secretary, I guess, to intercept it and pretend that Max is on vacation and that she'll just take the message. But then she has Betty get the files for her to look through. She sees Ben Gillis's name in the employment list that they've asked to see. So I think we're going to have Eden on the wrong side of quite a few cast members.
Yeah, so this sets up Eden and Cruz on opposite sides, and of course Mason and the rest of the family, and certainly particularly Eden and Cece, will be on opposite sides.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing a lot of pieces shift into place. And I have to say this episode, and especially this component of the episode, really reminded me of another show we've been watching at the same time, which we've mentioned before because it has a lot of similarities to this, and that is Succession. And we're just in the middle of season 2 of Succession, where the very Eden-like daughter in that family is starting to make corporate moves, partly to please her father as well.
Mm-hmm, yep, so we just saw, I thought it was very Santa Barbara-y, as she's trying to figure out if her dad's just, really gonna let her run the company, or if he's just saying that to keep her quiet, or what's going on.
Yeah. Now, I have to say, the character in Succession is probably someone, the head of the household, who would give CC a run for his money in this sort of evil corporate billionaire sweepstakes. So makes CC look fairly tame.
Yeah, that's true. Santana asks Brandon why he was so mad at her. And she says that my mom says I should stay away from you. She says that you're mean. And then they never actually continue that conversation.
No.
But they end up, they do end up going to the park together later. So Cruz tells Santana not to worry about Brandon because Cece won't let anything happen to him. Sophia tells Cruz that what he did was right. And then Cece invites Sophia to dinner at 8 that night. I'm sure Gina will be happy to hear that. Mason tries to visit Gina, but finds that he is not on the list of acceptable visitors. He goes to Cece to get permission, and he's already prepared for a fight because he says if he can't visit as a family member, he'll visit as Brandon's trustee. Cece says, "Oh, I'll sign whatever you want. Just get out of here." So Gina is very happy to see Mason. She asks about Brandon, and Mason says, "You're lucky to have Rosa. She practically raised all of us." And then Mason says, "You're going to come out of here a new woman. Then Sophia and Santana won't stand a chance." It's really nice for Gina to have someone on her side there. Cece arrives with that bouquet of flowers from Brandon. And Mason is still there. There's a bit of an overlap to their visits. Gina tells Cece that Mason is keeping an eye on Brandon for her. And then she accuses him and Sophia of getting closer. And she actually ends up getting quite upset while Cece's visiting there. Gina meets another resident at La Puerta who tells her that half the people there have just checked in voluntarily for an annual sobering up. Now, this woman already has kooky vibes the first time we see her. And,
I think
know
she's trouble.
Something's going to happen. And she, it's like a sanitarium. Or sanitarium? Is that what it is? It's not like a mental institution.
It's
but
kind of like a rehab clinic.
Yeah, but she gives off the vibes of, that you see every time someone's been institutionalized. There's always that crazy person who causes trouble. And that's the vibe she gave off. Maybe it was just her curly hair. But
I thought either that or she was, she's very anxious to be Gina's friend. And is very interested in the fact that she's Mrs. Cece Capwell and so on. So I thought either she was mentally unstable and
that's
would
what I
cause
initially
problems.
thought too. But then,
or that maybe she was a criminal or a crook or was going to do something kind of nefarious.
Which she did. At the very end, she reveals to Gina that she has a pill and that she can get her more. So she may well be one of those people who just checked in there to sell drugs to people who are in there trying to recover. That may be her sole purpose for being there.
And she could, but I could also see her taking it further, as Hank Judson did, and, blackmailing Gina, or, even perhaps kidnapping her, or something weird.
Yeah,
like
I
that.
mean, there's no telling how this could accelerate out of control. But unfortunately, it looks like a quick stint for Gina, and then return to her son and her life may not be in the cards if she's got someone on the inside working against her. Maybe Mason will realize something's wrong, that she's not getting better, or that maybe Mason will know that she's high when he comes to visit.
Or he may start noticing this other woman behaving in sort of strange ways or something too. It might not just be Gina who gives it away.
But I suspect Gina will be in there in a little longer than we thought. So.
Yeah, and that'll be really interesting to see what effect, if any, that has on some of the other relationships in the household. Certainly, already, we've seen it, that Eden is getting a much sort of wider array of choices than she had before. Of course, that's partly, I think, because Cece's pleased that she's no longer with Cruz.
Now, we have seen the last of the DA, Tony Patterson, at least Tony Patterson, number 1. I don't think we see number 2 till later on in the year, I think. So, I guess the DA is not really needed. I don't know if he won't be at the trial, Sophia's trial.
I don't know.
And we also have seen the last of Marcello this week as well. So
he basically had an ending though. So
yeah, he even had a nice goodbye to everyone.
And everyone seemed to basically forgive him.
Yeah, I mean Kelly was still angry with him, but
yeah.
So that is we've got another minor character leaving fairly soon. A couple of the minor ones will be wrapping up in the next week. No major ones leaving for a while.
I'm actually, one of the things I'm going to be really interested in, since we seem to be, now that the Channing thing has largely been put to rest, I guess not entirely, and probably a few more things to find out, but as we're moving into the whole Amy and Brick and the missing baby storyline, and then this whole thing with the Gillis trial and that, I'm really going to be interested to see just what kind of skills faux Jack Stanton has as a lawyer, or if he is actually even a lawyer at all.
Because he's being put in charge of a lot of things by the Capwells.
Yeah, and I'm sure the real one would have had the incredible skills, to have pulled off some of this, but we have no idea really what kind of skills the fake one has.
And definitely it's something Julia would realize very quickly. Either in the courtroom or in a deposition, if he doesn't act quite the same way that he used to.
So potentially this could backfire in a big way on CC if he doesn't have particularly strong legal skills. I mean, we've seen a little bit of him getting Brick out of jail, but I wouldn't think that would necessarily take a lot of legal cunning to do something like that. So.
Well, maybe we'll see this week. Maybe we'll get a little more insight if he has a chat with Parker Simonson about all his cases. Presumably Parker will say, "Good thing you're also a lawyer," or
something like that.
We'll have to get you some, a legal person to coach you or something.
Well, we've just been watching Perry Mason, who managed to get his law degree in 2 weeks in the 1930s, but I imagine that would be an unusual case.
Yes. I'm sure Jack Stanfield Lee's replacement won't just be handed a law degree. That is it for week 45 of Santa Barbara. We'll be back Monday with episode 223 and week 46. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Kill that ghost.